We have a presentation here that's going to be a little less on the technical side and a little bit more on the philosophical side. And this comes from the background that I have. I did my degrees in philosophy and then got into natural language processing. After that, did some ethics along the way. And after my first AI company, I started one to focus on issues of fairness and responsible artificial intelligence. And this encapsulates some of the ideas behind what we're developing. So the issue that is coming up, and I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with in the FAT literature, is that the outcomes of machine learning models that have been brought into production in the first wave of AI are not always trusted in a way that you would trust a human judgment, or sometimes the problem is that they act as if they were biased or discriminatory humans. And the major example that a lot of people have seen comes from Compass data set. It's up on Kaggle, you can play with, but the company was using artificial intelligence systems to provide judges with information that's kind of minority report style of predicting future likelihood of recidivism from those who have been incarcerated, and then judges would use this information to help them decide whether or not to allow a prisoner to be released from prison. And in this case, it's an example. The whole data set was quite biased against minorities. And Brisha here had been involved in the theft of a bicycle, whereas Vernon had a history of violent crime. And yet the system had selected Brisha to be high risk, and this is more than likely because the features that identified her as belonging to a certain race and a certain background reflected a history of discrimination, and the artificial intelligence systems were reproducing this kind of statistical bad behavior. And the problem is that the systems themselves in the first wave of artificial intelligence have not been subject to the kind of governance that we might expect. If you look at, say, the data sheets for data sets, very popular paper that was out in 2019, for example, they show in the faces in the wild data set, females only represent 22% of the faces for video and image detection. So the performance for females is expected to be highly degraded as compared to males. Or if you look at the reporting on the performance across in this case, Black lesbians versus straight white people, the ROC of the Perspective API's toxicity detector has a much greater performance for straight white people than for Black lesbians. And one imagines that there's an underrepresentation, and also feature selection was not performed in a way that would perform well on Black lesbians in this case. Now, what are we to do about this? The philosophical background of fairness in the past century leading into ours is heavily influenced by John Rawls and Robert Nozick. So very quickly get into their ideas. The distribution of goods within society, and that's what a lot of applications of machine learning decision making end up reflecting and prescribing. The distribution according to John Rawls, is neither just or unjust, not morally right, morally wrong. As it is just what it is. But the way that an institution handles the natural distribution is something that is subject to questions of morality and justice. So if you have a machine learning model and is trained on a data set that has a particular distribution, Rawls would say that that is the distribution within the data set is not something that we can pass judgment on. It's what we do with it. The thought experiment, it's a famous one from Rawls, is to reason behind a veil of ignorance. So how are we going to distribute goods within society so that they are justly distributed? Well, imagine yourself to not know who you're going to end up being within the society. You don't know your race, ethnicity, gender, income, wealth, any of these things. And you also don't know the exact political system that you're going to end up with. And behind this kind of veil of reasoning that you can think about justice from, you ask yourself, what kind of distribution system would I want if I was to realize who I was? You don't know if you are male, female, or what your sexual identity is, or any of these things. He reasons that everyone is going to want to adopt the maximin reasoning. So you're going to want to make sure that however you end up coming out into society, whatever your characteristics are, you're going to want to maximize the minimum level that you're going to receive. And this becomes a fundamental principle of justice, and one that has been greatly influential in the ethical and philosophical literature. By contrast, we take Robert Nozick, who is a strong libertarian, and he argues that everyone has individual moral rights. These are primary, and you have initially a right to yourself. You own yourself, and you can claim things accordingly, coming out of John Locke. And if someone were to take things from you, they would be violating your rights. And so if you are in a natural distribution where you have a lot of money because you inherited it, if someone was to tax that in order to give to the poor, that might be a problem for Nozick, because that is the state imposing a penalty on your natural distribution. This is the right that you have from birth. So the application of these ideas within machine learning context, say resume screening, is one where we can really see these thoughts coming out. So if you were to remove all protected category information from a resume screening AI system that was presenting the optimal hires to the hiring manager, the ordinary process is to just remove all of the obvious features and then assume that you have, say, gone behind a veil of ignorance and you're all good. The problem is that there are a lot of other variables that can, or other features that can present proxy variables for those protected category, race, age, gender type features. And then the machine learning model ends up learning this and reproducing the same results. So one can say we're going to tune the machine learning systems so that they hit minimum hiring targets. So the 4/5 rule, for example, is one where the say women and men both have to represent at least 4/5 of the other group. The options that people often have chosen between are group fairness. So that's an initial conception where you have the different protected category groups need to be equally represented in the machine learning model outcome. And this is kind of kludgy. It doesn't work because you are in effect doing what Nozick was afraid of, which is taking from those who deserve and giving it to those who may not deserve indiscriminately in order to make some kind of target. Individual fairness is one that's a little bit better and has been used in machine learning systems where you measure differential outcomes for individuals that are based on their protected category features. And then you would cluster together people who have task relevant features and identify those individuals who you provide a performance penalty for giving a different outcome to people who have similar clusters of task relevant features effectively. And then there's Rawlsian kind of implementation. And this implementation is one that I find very attractive and can be adopted by organizations that are seeking to do a more algorithmic approach to fairness, where effectively what you do is you take a set of trained models and you test them and you say, choose those, prefer the tuning parameters for those models where the people who end up in the least advantaged group are the best off on the whole. The problem that I'm trying to grapple with Fairly and the system that we're building is that a lot of these ethical questions are ones that data scientists, engineers are maybe capable, more capable of understanding in some sense, and maybe not in other senses. And those who are tasked with things like human rights, compliance within a company are at, say, the operating committee level and have no conception of how to address it for the data science. And there are some studies that are coming out now showing non-experts have very limited comprehension of the emerging fairness metrics. And you can see a very simple presentation of equalized odds metric where you see the lighter colored, the darker colored females in resume screening example who are applicants. Those who are qualified are darker color, those who are not qualified are lighter color, and then you see the same for men. And then in equalized odds, if a model satisfies that, then you would have something like this where you choose the green are those who are hired and the red are those who are selected to be discarded from the system, and you see equal representation, like 2 lines here, 1 line here, and so on. But even at this level of explanation, non-experts seem to perform poorly on comprehension tests and have negative views of any applications that use it. So if we jump back to Rawls, you could see the more elaborate or full version of his thinking is that we reason first in society from a perspective where we don't know who we are, we're behind a veil of ignorance, and we choose to have policies in which no matter what group of people we end up with, we're maximizing the distribution of goods that we're likely to receive. And inequalities are allowed, but only if everyone has equal opportunity and only if the inequalities themselves are producing better outcomes for those who are least advantaged. But it doesn't end there. He says from there, we then reason towards a constitution and we learn more facts about society at this point of the reasoning process. And then we have more detailed legislation. And then we have judges and administrators who have full knowledge of the society and make judgments on the basis of what came before, the Constitution, the legislation, and the principle of justice. So within an organization, if you have a very complex machine learning process with a great number of downstream SaaS products, APIs that you might have from third-party vendors that have various performance qualities that you don't really understand, and then your own data sets that can be siloed, that you don't understand too much about. You need to have the information all managed in the same place, and then ongoing monitoring of the whole process. And this is what we're building. And the user interface in this situation is difficult to figure out how simple it should be. Make it fair is what say senior executives might want. There might be a few options given, and maybe more likely multi-stakeholder complexity appropriate to those who are more specialized and in different areas of an organization. One thing that we are developing is a reinforcement learning approach where we gather information all into one place and have policies that are set that establish thresholds and other tuning parameters that would be recommended for particular models, and these policies that have human understandable, or ideally somewhat human understandable certificates that show lower performance and current performance measures and thresholds. We have information system needs to hit the training, testing, and data, metadata along that, as well as the model test requirements that are involved in organization testing results, and the information about the deployment environment, as well as practitioners and managers who have made decisions, sign off, and alterations to a threshold. So we look at data, scan it, and make adjustments accordingly, test the models, and do impact analysis that involves consultants and providing information into the system, and then allow for manual policy decisions to be made accordingly. And I'll leave this at there, and I guess we can jump to questions.
I'm curious to know, David, tell us a little bit more about Fairly AI and what the business does, and some of the stuff you guys are working on at the moment.
So we are developing a system for managing information that is presented at management level and above. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of model ops tools that are incredibly useful for building high-performant models and adjusting as necessary if you are a data scientist. Mm-hmm. The gap that we see is between the communications with data scientists and with their managers, and with senior executives who have to make decisions about budget, about roadmaps, and do not understand what the performance quality of their models are in a meaningful way, as well as mm-hmm. producing traceability and audit trails of what's been done. So the benefit to the data scientists is that from so many conversations that we've had, data scientists want to get into fair AI. They want to spend their time making the systems more responsible and addressing the kinds of needs that we're looking at, and yet you don't get that kind of direct contact on the development tasks that are assigned to you and the time given in order to address these. So we want to provide a streamlined process for information gathering, management, and then allow for the legal department to sign off, and the downstream suppliers, if you're building, say, a SaaS product, to also have the necessary information for you. So if you look at data sheets for data sets, we have a system that automates the generation of that information and then used around.
Awesome. Well, we'd certainly have a few questions for you there, mate. So we've got one from Philip. Any recommendations for how to learn more about this topic for people with maths, stats, and a computer science background?
There are many conferences. We're talking with Canadians. Montreal AI Ethics Institute is a really good source to begin if you want to join a community. And just type Fair AI into Google Scholar, to be honest. I mean, it's everywhere.
Cool. Yeah. Nice one. Thanks for that, Philip. We got a question. It seems a lot of lobbying might be needed to convince the companies on the Rawls framework. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, many thoughts. The issues that the roadblocks that people have to this concept are that they expect no company's going to act until there is AI specific regulation. And you do have some with the CCPA, GDPR. There's an Algorithmic Accountability Act that's gone through in the Senate. Hopefully something similar will actually get passed in the future. And then companies will immediately adjust to the regulatory environment and fast. But in the meantime, the fact is that if you are responsible for bringing a system into a digital automation, and you have the option to build a system that does not fall foul of potential PR issues, regulatory issues, and you can do this by optimizing your system in a way that makes it more highly performant. Once this is understood, then there are a lot of applications in which this is a big money maker. So if you think about all of the policies that are denied by insurance companies that are based upon historical bias, historical discrimination, and then you adjust for that, that means that there are a lot of policies that are not being given to potential customers that are, say, a good loan risk, and your system has not thought so in the past. But if you correct for that, you are making a lot of money from those unrealized profits.
Cool. We've got another one from Wilco. He said, which industries are most focused and want to do something with frameworks and ethics in AI?
Well, I think insurance, financials, healthcare are all very highly regulated, are already working with large data science teams and large amounts of data, and have been very receptive or are already building internal frameworks like this. And I would expect from there other industries will follow.
Cool. Thanks for that, Wilco. We have a question. Have you personally worked on an AI solution and discovered a bias in the model? If so, how did you discover the bias, i.e. how did you identify those kind of biases?
So the biases I worked with natural language processing systems for identifying cyberbullying, sexuality, substance use, and other issues for a parental monitoring tool in the past. And these biases were not obvious to us while we were doing the work, but they became obvious once our systems got into the QA process. And then having to go back and correct for this was a major issue, and it would have been much nicer to be working in a preventative way that had ongoing monitoring.
Cool. We have a question from Anthony, who is actually our next presenter. He said, how do you ensure an ethical reward and punishment framework for the reinforcement model?
So there are release decisions. There are performance metrics that are well established. that are used as rewards. So a cumulative reward function built upon multiple inputs, very heavily on individual release decisions, but we're developing it. Yeah.
Cool. And final question is from John. He said, have you developed an AI ethics framework? How is it different from those existing frameworks such as IBM or the Google tools?
So we are trying to provide some flexibility on those frameworks. We don't want to impose frameworks on a company that are very specific, but we are developing kind of ISO-inspired framework in which there's a component where there's the planning phase. We have algorithmic impact assessments as part of that, as well as gathering data about your resources. Plan, do, check, act is the basic ISO process, and we're following that because that's going to be adopted across companies, and then allowing a fairly high level of configurability to suit the company's needs.